Has this ever happened to you? You go share good news with a friend or a family member, and instead of excitement, you feel the energy shift. The smile tightens, the response gets quieter, and the good news isn't received the way you hoped it would. Maybe they say something polite but distant. Maybe they change the subject, or maybe they compare it to their own life. And you walk away wondering why something that felt happy now feels heavy. If you ever felt that, like you're allowed to struggle but not really allowed to shine, this episode is for you. Because for so many of us, joy has never felt fully safe. We learned how to show up for pain, how to hold space for hardship, how to survive together. But we were never taught how to celebrate each other. So when something good happens, when healing starts, when growth shows, it can create distance instead of connection. And it's not because you did something wrong, it's because your light touches places in others that still hurt. And over time, when that keeps happening, you start to make yourself smaller. You stop sharing your wins, and you protect your joy. You become cautious with happiness because connection has often come with disappointment. Today, we're talking about that pattern, the one that follows so many cycle breakers through friendships. The pattern that begins in family dynamics and repeats in adult relationships. The one rooted in an old inherited fear of being seen. And we'll talk about why healing sometimes costs relationships, but leads you closer to the ones that can actually hold you. This is Born Tired, where survival meets healing, a podcast for those of us who grew up in survival mode but are ready to heal and speak our truth. I'm Irene, a cycle breaker learning what peace feels like after years of survival. Every episode is an invitation to rest inside your truth, to feel seen, and to remember you are never alone. This is what it sounds like when silence finally breaks. Before we begin, I want to share a gentle reminder. Please listen in a way that feels safe for you. If at any point you need to pause or step away, honor that. Your well-being matters more than finishing the episode. You are not alone. Take care of yourself while you listen. There's a pattern I didn't understand for most of my life. But once I saw it, everything clicked. It wasn't just about friendships falling apart or awkward comments or the distance that would always happen when something good was going on in my life. It was about what happened when I shined. Growing up, I learned early that love came with conditions. I could be the supporter, the helper, the protector, the one who held things together. But when I needed support, when I took up space, or when something good happened for me, the energy always shifted. At home, I felt it with my family. Connection often came through comparison, silence, or emotional absence. And without realizing it, I recreated that dynamic in friendships. I found myself constantly surrounded by people who loved me when I was struggling, but seemed uncomfortable when I was growing. I could cheer for their relationships, celebrate their milestones. I could hold space for their pain. But when it was my turn, there were tight smiles, backhanded compliments, and distance. I remember when I got married, instead of joy, a person I thought was a close friend said, "I always thought I'd be married first," while rolling her eyes. There was no congratulations. At the time, I laughed it off because that's what I always did. I laughed things off. But moments like that kept stacking up. Friends who downplayed my accomplishments, who changed the subject when I shared good news, who supported me only when I was hurting. But they always pulled away when I was happy. There was another moment that made the pattern almost impossible to ignore. After my third child was born, I made the decision that I felt was big and hopeful. I decided to go back to school and get my bachelor's degree. It wasn't easy. I was a mom and I was exhausted. I was already carrying a lot. There was a point where I was going to school full-time, working full-time while raising kids. It wasn't perfect or easy, but I didn't want to quit because for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was choosing something for myself. I was proud of myself for even wanting more. So I shared the news with someone I thought would be excited for me and considered a friend. I expected encouragement. Maybe you got this girl, or excitement, or support. Instead, they looked at me and said, "You know it's going to be hard, right? Good luck trying to figure that out." And it wasn't in a concerned or supportive way. It was in a doubtful way. In a way that felt like, why would you even try? And in that moment, I felt the familiar heaviness again. The subtle message of, don't reach too high, don't expect too much, stay where you are. It wasn't really about school. It was about projection, about their own fears, their own doubts and limits. But it felt like a warning, like my growth made people uncomfortable, and my dreams felt unrealistic to those who had stopped dreaming themselves. I realized how often that happened in my life. Every time I tried to expand, emotionally, professionally, spiritually, there was almost always someone nearby reminding me how hard it would be. Not offering me help or belief, just offering me their limitations. That's what projection looks like. When someone hands you their fear and calls it realism, or their insecurity on your dreams and calls it concern, or when someone who couldn't imagine doing it themselves tries to make you doubt you can. And when you've grown up as a scapegoat, as the one who never gets centered, prioritized, or fully supported, those comments stay with you. Because you're already fighting an old belief that says, maybe I shouldn't want too much. I shouldn't reach too far. I should stay small. But healing taught me something important. People who are secure in themselves don't shrink your dreams. They don't warn you away from growth, and they don't project fear onto your future. They encourage you, they cheer you, and they believe with you. And looking back now, I can see clearly that so many of those moments weren't about protecting me. They were about protecting comfort and the version of me that stayed in the background. Because when you grow, it challenges the people around you to look at their own lives. And not everyone is ready for that. So instead of celebrating, they discourage you. Instead of supporting you, they caution you. Instead of cheering, they doubt. And for years, I absorbed that. I questioned myself, I second-guessed my dreams, and I hid my excitement until I finally realized my growth was never the problem. Their fear was. I was safe when I was small. I was uncomfortable when I was shining. I used to think something was wrong with me. Why did joy seem to create distance with people? Why did my growth feel like betrayal? Over time, I started to understand this pattern differently. In a lot of environments, especially in families where there wasn't enough emotional safety, love can start to feel limited. Like there's only room for one person to be seen, one person to be supported or take up space. So when someone begins to grow, when they start healing or building something for themselves, it can shift the dynamic. It changes what people are used to. And not everyone knows how to stay connected through that kind of change. I started to see how often growth challenges the people around you. It asks them, without saying anything, to look at their own lives. And if someone isn't ready for that, they don't always respond with support. Sometimes it shows up as distance, as doubt, or as comments that make you question yourself. As the scapegoat, I was already the one who disrupted unhealthy systems. I was the truth teller, the cycle breaker, the one who didn't fit into the dysfunction. So when I healed, when I built peace, it wasn't just change. I was a threat to old dynamics. Some people didn't know how to love me outside of struggle. My light reminded them of what they hadn't healed, and my happiness highlighted their pain. So instead of celebrating my growth, it showed up as distance, comparison, and resentment. I don't think these individuals were evil, but I do believe unhealed people often experience your growth as abandonment. And inherited survival patterns taught many of us that only one woman gets to shine, that success is limited, that joy is competitive, and that someone else's light takes away from yours. That pattern shows up in really specific ways. It shows up as comparison instead of celebration, envy instead of support, and withdrawing when someone thrives. If you grew up as a scapegoat, you often become the one who sees things differently first, the one who questions patterns and starts to change, which means you feel this loss again and again. Over time, I stopped sharing my wins. I became cautious with my joy, and I was selective with my vulnerability. My nervous system had learned visibility cost relationships. Happiness invites rejection, and shining creates distance. Healing this has meant relearning something radical. There is room for all of us to shine. Real friendship doesn't compete. It doesn't shrink when you grow. It grows with you. Now I choose relationships that feel safe in joy, not just in pain. Where my wins are met with excitement, my growth is met with encouragement, and I don't have to dim myself to stay connected. And yes, that has meant fewer friendships, but it's also meant healthier ones. I'm no longer betraying myself to keep the peace or shrinking to make others comfortable. I'm allowing myself to be seen. And every time I do, I'm not just healing my story, but generations before me that were taught to stay small to survive. What I started realizing as I untangled these patterns was that it didn't begin in friendships. It began in my home, in a house where attention, safety, and emotional care weren't equally shared, where my siblings' needs were louder, more urgent, and always centered. And it's not because they asked for it, but because my parents structured the family that way. When there was conflict, their feelings were protected. When there was pain, theirs was tended to. When there was chaos, mine was absorbed. I learned early that love was directed toward the one who needed it the most. And that was never me. So I adapted. I became the independent child, the strong one, the one who didn't ask for much. I learned to put myself second so things could stay calm. I learned that making myself smaller kept the peace, and tending to others' emotions was how I stayed connected. When you learn this as a child, it becomes your relationship blueprint. Without realizing, I walked into friendships already prepared to prioritize everyone else. I listened more than I spoke. I supported more than I shared. I showed up even when I was exhausted. I was the friend that remembered birthdays. I checked in. I held space. I encouraged your dreams, but I didn't take up too much space of my own. I didn't talk about my fears, my hopes, my needs, not fully. Because somewhere deep inside, I believed relationships worked best when I was useful, not when I was authentic. I had learned that connection came from caretaking, from making sure everyone else was okay first. I wasn't just afraid of shining. I was afraid of needing, of asking for emotional support, afraid that if I took up too much space, I would be too much. That fear showed up in how I chose my friends. I gravitated towards people who needed me, who leaned on me, who felt familiar in their emotional unavailability. And I thought that was closeness. But closeness built on imbalance always turns into exhaustion. You end up pouring into cups that were never meant to pour back. What hurt the most wasn't that people needed me. It was that I didn't feel allowed to need them. When I was struggling, I minimized it. When I was hurting, I softened it. When I needed support, I apologized for it. I showed up half present in my own life. Over time, that disconnect from myself grew heavier. I wasn't just losing friendships, I was losing my voice inside relationships, access to my own emotions, and the ability to show up as my full self. And that's the cost of scapegoating. You don't just learn to carry blame, you learn to carry everyone. You become the emotional container for rooms you were never meant to hold. Healing meant seeing how unfair that was. Seeing that I wasn't strong because I could handle it. I was strong because I survived being overlooked. And once I saw that survival isn't the same as being loved, I had to grieve something big. The childhood where I learned my needs came last. The friendships where I played supporting roles instead of being fully known. And the version of me who believed love had to be earned through emotional labor. It was realizing how long I lived without letting myself be seen. But the grief was also freedom. Awareness changes everything. Once I understood the pattern, I could stop repeating it. I could choose friendships that felt mutual. I could practice saying, I need support too. I could share joy without shrinking it. I could show up as my authentic self, not the caretaker version. And that felt uncomfortable at first, because authenticity feels risky when you spend your life being easy to love. But slowly, I learned something beautiful. The right people don't leave you when you take up space. They don't pull away when you shine. And they don't disappear when you need support. They lean in. They celebrate. They hold you. And in those moments, I started to rewrite what connection felt like based on mutual care. That's when healing stopped being just about boundaries. It became about letting myself exist fully in relationships. There's another part of this I had to learn over time. Because not everyone has the option just to remove themselves from these dynamics. Sometimes it's family. It's people you're still connected to in real ways. And sometimes distance isn't immediate or even possible. Those situations, the work looks a little different. For me, it became less about trying to change how people responded and more about being intentional with what I shared and with who. I started to notice patterns. Who could actually sit in a moment of joy with me? Who could celebrate me without shifting the energy? Who could be present without comparison or discomfort? And I also noticed who couldn't. And that awareness changed something for me. I stopped leading with my good news in spaces where I already knew it wouldn't be received. I stopped looking for validation in places that had never offered it. Instead, I began sharing those moments with people who could meet me there. People who could be in that moment with me, who didn't make it about themselves, shrink it, or redirect it. That didn't mean I cut everyone off. It just meant I became more intentional with my energy. And that shift alone created more safety for me. It allowed me to experience joy without bracing for disappointment and to protect something that used to feel fragile. This is something I came across through Dr. Ramani's work on YouTube. The idea that we don't always have to change the relationship immediately, but we can change how we show up within it, what we share, when we share, and who we share it with. And for me, that became a form of self-protection. As I've continued healing, I've realized that some of the deepest wounds come from the places where we were never fully met, not being chosen, centered, or protected. Those experiences shape how we move through the world. When you grow up in a family where someone else's needs always come first, you internalize a belief that love has limits, that there's only so much care to go around, and that belief follows you into adulthood. It whispers when you start to succeed, when you feel proud, when something good happens. It tells you to lower your voice, to soften your happiness, and to not make it a big deal. Because somewhere deep inside, you learn that joy disrupts the balance. But healing has taught me that love is not a scarce resource, and care does not need to be competed for. Another person's pain does not cancel out your right to happiness. When you're raised in emotionally limited environments, we're taught to treat love like something that has to be rationed. And that scarcity mindset is what turns relationships into quiet competitions. Who needs more support? Who deserves more attention? Who gets to shine? But real connection isn't built on taking turns shrinking. It's built on expansion, on making room, and on celebrating each other fully. Part of reclaiming myself has been letting go of the belief that I have to step aside for others to be loved. Letting myself take up space without guilt. Experiencing joy without apologizing. And being proud of growth instead of minimizing it. That hasn't always been easy, because when you're used to being the background character in your own story, stepping into the center feels scary. Sometimes it feels selfish and uncomfortable. I've learned that not everyone will be able to come with you into this new version of yourself. Some people are attached to the role you played in their life, the supporter, the listener, the one who never needed too much. And when you change that role, the relationship has to change too. Sometimes it grows stronger, sometimes it fades, and sometimes it ends. Outgrowing relationships doesn't make you disloyal. It means you're evolving and honoring your full humanity. One of the most freeing things I've learned is that I don't have to earn love by being useful. I don't have to stay small to stay connected, or carry everyone else's emotions to deserve care. I'm allowed to be supported, celebrated, and seen, and so are you. If you've ever felt like you were always the strong one, the understanding one, the one who held things together, I want you to hear this clearly. You were never meant to do that alone. Strength was a survival skill, not a life sentence. You deserve relationships where you can rest, be honest, and be joyful without fear of rejection. Where your growth is welcomed, not resented. Healing doesn't mean you'll never feel the old instinct to shrink again. Sometimes it still shows up. I still catch myself wanting to downplay good news, to soften my joy, to protect others from my happiness. But now I recognize it, and instead of listening to it, I choose myself. That's what breaking cycles really looks like. It's the small daily choices to honor your worth, to speak, to shine, to receive. And every time you do, you're rewriting what love gets to feel like. You're teaching your nervous system that connection doesn't have to cost you yourself. You're building relationships rooted in mutual care instead of emotional survival. And slowly, the world becomes softer, safer, and more spacious for all the parts of you that once had to hide. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need it. And take a moment to leave a review wherever you listen. Your review helps more people find the podcast and reminds others they're not alone. Don't forget to subscribe or follow the show so you never miss an episode. You can also join me on Substack, where I share weekly reflections and gentle reminders to help you feel less alone on your healing journey. You'll find the link in the show notes. If you'd like to connect beyond the podcast, you can find me on Instagram at Born Tired Podcast. I'd love to hear what resonated with you. And if you'd like to support the podcast, there's a link there to buy me a coffee. Thank you for being here, for listening with an open heart. Most of all, remember this: your story matters, your voice matters, and you are not alone.